The dust hung thick in the air that Tuesday morning, coating everything in Millbrook County with a fine layer of amber grit. It wasn't the kind of dust that comes from construction or traffic. This was the dust of drought, of failed crops, of dreams that had withered under an unforgiving sun. The courthouse steps were crowded with people who had nowhere else to be, folks whose luck had run as dry as their wells. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Margaret Chen stood at the edge of the crowd, her weathered hands gripping a clipboard that held the day's auction listings. As the county clerk, she'd overseen hundreds of these sales, farm equipment, livestock, household goods of families who couldn't make their payments. But today's final item made her stomach turn. She'd tried to talk Judge Morrison out of it, had spent an hour in his chambers the night before, arguing that some things shouldn't be sold, regardless of what the law allowed. "It's legal, Margaret," the judge had said, not meeting her eyes. "The stepfather has rights, the girl's got no means of support, and that baby she's carrying needs a provider. Sometimes the law isn't pretty, but it keeps people from starving." Margaret had wanted to tear up the papers right then, but she knew someone else would just type up new ones. At least this way, she could try to ensure the girl went to someone decent, if such a person existed in this God-forsaken crowd. The girl in question sat on a wooden crate behind the courthouse, her back against the brick wall. 18-year-old Emma Louise Harrison had the kind of beauty that belonged in magazines, not in the desperate circumstances that had brought her here. Her auburn hair caught the morning light, and her green eyes held a depth that spoke of too much understanding of the world's cruelties. At 7 months pregnant, she moved with the careful grace of someone protecting precious cargo. Her 5-year-old half-brother Timothy sat beside her, his small hand clutching hers with fierce determination. The boy's blonde hair stuck up in all directions, and his face bore the telltale marks of someone who'd been crying but was trying hard to be brave. He wore the only clothes he owned, a faded Superman t-shirt and jeans with patches on both knees. "Emmy, I'm scared," Timothy whispered. His voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. Emma squeezed his hand tighter. "I know, sweetheart, but remember what I told you. We stick together no matter what happens, you and me and the baby. We're a team." The boy nodded solemnly, as if he understood the weight of responsibility that had been placed on his young shoulders. In truth, he'd been Emma's shadow since their mother died 2 years ago, and she'd been more of a parent to him than anyone else in his short life. Their stepfather, Dale Brennan, paced nearby like a caged animal. His face was flushed with drink, despite the early hour, and his clothes reeked of stale cigarettes and cheaper whiskey. Dale was a man of average height but below-average character, the kind who looked for someone to blame for every disappointment in his life. "Today, that someone was Emma. Should have never let you stay after your mama passed," he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. "Feeding 2 extra mouths when I can barely feed myself. And now you go and get yourself in trouble with some boy who won't even stick around to face what he's done." Emma's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She'd learned long ago that arguing with Dale only made things worse. The baby's father, Michael, had been a traveling salesman who'd swept through town with promises of love and a future together. When she'd told him about the pregnancy, he'd disappeared like morning mist, leaving behind only a forwarding address that turned out to be fake. The crowd began to gather closer as Margaret Chen climbed the courthouse steps. Word had spread quickly through Millbrook County about today's unusual auction. Some folks had come out of morbid curiosity, others with darker intentions. There were a few genuine families in the crowd, farming couples who might provide a decent home, but they were outnumbered by the men with hungry eyes who saw an opportunity to acquire both a young woman and a built-in family for the price of a decent horse. Among the watchers stood Jeremiah Caldwell, though few people noticed him. At 42, he had the kind of presence that seemed to absorb attention rather than demand it. Tall and lean, with premature grey threading through. His dark hair, he wore clean but well-worn clothes that spoke of a man who took care of what he had. His calloused hands and sun-weathered face marked him as someone who worked the land, but his eyes held an intelligence that came from books as well as experience. Jeremiah had come to town for supplies, not for an auction. His farm sat 15 miles outside Millbrook, far enough that he only made the trip when necessary. He'd been loading feed sacks into his truck when he'd overheard two men talking about the day's events. "Prettiest thing you ever saw," one had said with a leer that made Jeremiah's skin crawl, and already proven fertile, "might be worth the investment." The other man had laughed in a way that suggested they weren't talking about farming. Dale Brennan's finally found a way to profit from that girl. Been a burden on him since her mama died. At least now he'll get something for his trouble. Jeremiah had finished loading his truck in silence, but instead of heading home, he'd found himself walking toward the courthouse. He told himself he was just curious, that it was none of his business what happened to strangers. But the truth was more complicated than that. 3 years ago, Jeremiah had buried his wife Sarah and their infant daughter Rose on the same grey October day. Sarah had died from complications in childbirth, and the baby had followed her within hours. Since then, his world had grown smaller and quieter, bounded by fence lines and daily chores that kept his hands busy but did nothing for the ache in his chest. He'd been a different man before the loss, quick to laugh, eager to help neighbors, full of plans for the future he and Sarah would build together. Now he moved through his days with the mechanical precision of someone going through motions, tending his land and his animals with competent detachment. Most folks in the county barely knew his name, which was exactly how he preferred it. But something about the situation unfolding at the courthouse had broken through his carefully maintained isolation. Maybe it was the injustice of it, or maybe it was the way the girl held herself with dignity despite her circumstances. Whatever the reason, he found himself unable to walk away. Margaret Chen's voice carried across the courthouse yard as she began the day's proceedings. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to today's county auction. We'll begin with the household items from the Patterson estate, followed by farm equipment from the Morrison place." The crowd shifted restlessly. Everyone knew the real draw was at the end of the list. Emma felt her baby kick sharply, as if sensing her anxiety. She placed both hands on her swollen belly and tried to breathe steadily. Timothy had fallen asleep against her shoulder, exhausted by fear and confusion. She didn't want to wake him, but she also didn't want him to witness what was about to happen. "Tim," she whispered, gently shaking his shoulder. "Wake up, honey." The boy's eyes fluttered open, immediately alert in the way children learn to be when their world is unpredictable. "Is it time?" Emma nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Listen to me carefully. Remember what I taught you about being brave? Today, you might have to be the bravest you've ever been, but no matter what happens, remember that I love you more than all the stars in the sky." Timothy's lower lip trembled, but he nodded. "I love you too, Emmy, and I love the baby, even though I haven't met her yet." "Him or her," Emma corrected with a sad smile. "We don't know yet, remember?" "It's a girl," Timothy said with the certainty that only children possess. "I dreamed about her. She's gonna have curly hair like Mama did." The mention of their mother brought tears to Emma's eyes, but she blinked them back. She needed to be strong now, for Timothy and for the child she carried. The auction moved through its preliminary items with the steady rhythm of commerce. Furniture sold to the highest bidder. Tools changed hands, and life went on for everyone except the girl sitting against the courthouse wall. With each item sold, Emma felt her fate drawing closer like a storm on the horizon. Dale Brennan had positioned himself near the auctioneer's podium, counting money in his head and occasionally glancing back at Emma with the satisfaction of a man about to solve his problems. He'd already had offers from several interested parties, though none of them had impressed him as particularly generous. The Hartley brothers, known throughout the county for their rough treatment of hired help, had offered $50 and seemed to think their reputation should make up the difference. Old Mr. Granger, a widower with a farm south of town, had offered $75, but wanted to inspect Emma's teeth first, like she was livestock. The offer that had caught Dale's attention came from a man named Vincent Russo, who'd driven down from the state capital in a fancy car and wore a suit that probably cost more than most folks made in a month. Russo claimed to own a boarding house and said he needed a girl to help with cooking and cleaning. His offer of $100 was generous enough to make Dale suspicious, but not suspicious enough to turn down. What Dale didn't know, what Emma suspected but couldn't prove, was that Vincent Russo's boarding house was the kind of establishment where women worked but never seemed to leave, where the work had nothing to do with cooking or cleaning, and where babies were considered inconveniences to be dealt with quickly and quietly. Emma had seen the way Russo looked at her, had noticed how his questions focused more on her appearance than her domestic skills. When he'd asked Dale if she was cooperative, the meaning behind the word had been clear enough to make her skin crawl. Margaret Chen's voice carried across the courtyard again as the auction neared its end. And now we come to our final item of the day. By order of the county court, and at the request of legal guardian Dale Brennan, we have Miss Emma Louise Harrison, age 18, currently with child, and her half-brother Timothy Harrison, age 5. They are to be sold as a unit to provide care and support. Do I hear an opening bid? The words hung in the air like a curse. Emma felt Timothy's hand tighten in hers as the reality of their situation crashed over them both. They were about to be sold like property, their futures determined by whoever had the most money and the willingness to spend it. The bidding started slowly. Old Mr. Granger offered $60, his voice creaky with age. One of the Hartley brothers countered with $65, prompting an immediate response from his sibling. The price crept upward as other voices joined in, each bid reducing Emma and Timothy to numbers on a ledger. Vincent Russo waited until the bidding reached $80 before making his move. $100, he called out in a smooth voice that carried the confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. The crowd fell silent. It was more money than most of them saw in a month, and the bidding seemed to be over before it had really begun. Emma closed her eyes and tried not to think about what her life would become under Russo's ownership. Dale Brennan was practically rubbing his hands together with glee. $100 would pay his debts and leave enough left over for a week-long celebration. He was already planning how he'd spend the money when a new voice cut through the silence. $150. Every head in the crowd turned to see who had spoken. Standing at the back of the crowd, hat in his hands, was Jeremiah Caldwell. His voice had been quiet but clear, and his eyes were fixed not on the auctioneer but on Emma herself. Emma looked up at him with surprise and something that might have been hope. She didn't know this man, had never seen him before in her life, but there was something in his steady gaze that was different from the hunger she'd seen. In the other bidder's eyes, Vincent Russo's composure slipped for just a moment, his confident smile replaced by a look of irritation. He'd expected an easy purchase, and this unexpected competition was an unwelcome complication. $175, he called out, his voice sharper than before. Jeremiah didn't hesitate. $200. A murmur ran through the crowd. $200 was serious money, more than most folks in Millbrook County saw in 3 months. Vincent Russo's face had gone pale, and he was clearly calculating whether his investment would still be profitable at such a price. Margaret Chen looked between the two men, her expression carefully neutral despite the relief she felt. She'd known Jeremiah Caldwell by reputation, a quiet man who kept to himself, but had never been known for anything but honest dealing. If Emma had to be sold to someone, he was infinitely preferable to Vincent Russo. 200, going once. Margaret called out, giving Russo a chance to respond. The man in the expensive suit looked at Emma again, then at Jeremiah, weighing his options. Finally, he shook his head and stepped back into the crowd. The price had exceeded what he was willing to pay for uncertain returns. Going twice, Margaret continued, her heart racing. Dale Brennan looked like he might faint from excitement. $200 was more money than he'd ever seen at one time in his life. He was already mentally spending it on whiskey and poker games. Sold, Margaret announced, bringing her gavel down with finality. To Mr. Caldwell for $200. The crowd began to disperse, the entertainment over and normal life ready to resume. Emma sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. In the space of a few minutes, her life had been fundamentally changed. She belonged to a stranger now, a man whose name she didn't even know, and whose intentions remained a mystery. Jeremiah walked toward them slowly, as if he understood that sudden movements might frighten them. When he reached Emma and Timothy, he knelt down so he could speak to them at eye level. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My name is Jeremiah Caldwell, he said quietly. I have a farm about 15 miles from here. It's not much, but it's clean and safe, and there's plenty of room for a family. Emma searched his face for signs of deception or hidden motives, but found only sincerity. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you do this for strangers? Jeremiah was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. Because everyone deserves a chance at something better, he said finally. And because it felt like the right thing to do. Timothy looked up at him with wide eyes. Are you going to hurt Emmy and the baby? No, Jeremiah said firmly. I'm going to take care of all of you if you'll let me. Dale Brennan appeared at Jeremiah's shoulder, reeking of alcohol and barely contained excitement. Well now, don't that just work out perfect for everyone? You got yourself a fine bargain there, Mr. Caldwell. The girl's strong as an ox and smart enough to earn her keep. And the boy, well, he's young enough to train up right. Jeremiah's jaw tightened at Dale's words, but he kept his voice level. I'll be taking them home now. Course, Dale said, waving a dismissive hand. Just as soon as we settle up the money. Cash only, you understand. Can't be too careful in business dealings. Jeremiah reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather wallet. He counted out $200 in bills, more money than Dale had ever held at one time. The stepfather's eyes lit up as he snatched the cash and began counting it immediately. Pleasure doing business with you, Dale said, pocketing the money without so much as a glance at Emma or Timothy. They're your problem now. As Dale walked away, already heading toward the nearest saloon, Emma felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that she and Timothy were free of him, fear about what lay ahead, and a strange sense of gratitude toward the quiet man who had just changed their lives. Jeremiah offered Emma his hand to help her stand. She took it carefully, her pregnant body making the movement awkward. Timothy immediately attached himself to her side, still uncertain about this new development in their lives. I have a wagon across the street, Jeremiah said. It's a bit of a ride to the farm, but I've got blankets if you get cold. As they walked toward his wagon, Emma tried to process the enormity of what had just happened. An hour ago, she'd been facing a future that she couldn't bear to think about. Now, she was walking beside a stranger who had spent $200 to buy her freedom, or at least a different kind of captivity. The wagon was sturdy but plain, loaded with supplies. From Jeremiah's trip to town, he helped Emma up onto the seat, then lifted Timothy up beside her. The boy had remained silent during the transaction, but his grip on Emma's hand never loosened. As they drove through the streets of Millbrook and out onto the country road that led to Jeremiah's farm, Emma allowed herself to hope for the first time in months that maybe, just maybe, their story might have a different ending than the one she'd feared. The 15-mile journey to Jeremiah's farm stretched across rolling hills that had once been green with promise, but now bore the scars of 3 consecutive years of drought. The wagon wheels carved deep ruts in the dusty road, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small group making their way toward an uncertain future. Emma sat stiffly on the wagon seat, her back aching from the baby's weight and the jolting motion of the vehicle. Timothy had fallen asleep against her side, his small body finally succumbing to the exhaustion of the day's traumatic events. She envied his ability to escape into sleep, to find refuge from the overwhelming reality of their situation. Jeremiah drove in silence, his weathered hands steady on the reins. Every so often, Emma caught him glancing at her from the corner of his eye, as if checking to make sure she was still there, that this wasn't some elaborate dream or mistake. She wanted to ask him questions. Where exactly they were going, what he expected from them, whether he was really as kind as he seemed, but the words stuck in her throat. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled deeper into farming country. Abandoned homesteads dotted the horizon like broken teeth, their collapsed roofs and empty windows testament to the harsh realities of agricultural life during hard times. Some farms showed signs of life, chickens pecking in dusty yards, laundry hanging on lines, but even these seemed to hang on by mere threads of determination. "How much farther?" Timothy asked sleepily, his voice muffled against Emma's arm. "Not much longer now," Jeremiah replied, his voice gentle. It was the first time he'd spoken since they'd left town, and Emma was surprised by how naturally he addressed the child, without the condescension that many adults used with children. As if on cue, they crested a small hill, and Jeremiah's farm came into view. Emma's first impression was one of modest prosperity in a land that had forgotten what prosperity looked like. The farmhouse was small but well-maintained, its white paint showing only minor weathering. A red barn stood behind it, surrounded by neat fences that contained a few horses and cattle. Vegetable gardens stretched along the south side of the house, their rows precisely planted and carefully tended despite the dry conditions. What struck Emma most was the sense of order and care that permeated the property. This was clearly the home of someone who took pride in his work, who believed in maintaining what he had, even when times were tough. It was so different from the chaos and neglect of Dale's ramshackle house that she felt tears prick her eyes. "It's beautiful," she said softly, the first words she'd spoken since leaving the courthouse. Jeremiah pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and set the brake. "It's not much," he said, climbing down and coming around to help her, "but it's home." He lifted Timothy down first, the boy looking around with wide eyes at their new surroundings. A tabby cat emerged from the barn and approached cautiously. Tail high with curiosity, Timothy immediately knelt and extended his hand, making soft clicking noises. "That's Patches," Jeremiah said. "She's friendly, but she likes to decide for herself who she trusts." Emma accepted Jeremiah's help, getting down from the wagon, grateful for his steady support as she maneuvered her pregnant body to the ground. The baby had been unusually active during the ride, as if sensing the change in their circumstances. The front door of the house opened, and an elderly woman emerged onto the porch. She was small and compact, with steel-grey hair pulled back in, a practical bun and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her expression was one of surprise, mixed with concern. "Jeremiah Caldwell, what on earth have you done?" she asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to speaking her mind. "Mrs. Patterson," Jeremiah said, removing his hat. "I'd like you to meet Emma and Timothy. They'll be staying with us for a while." The woman, who Emma guessed to be in her 60s, descended the porch steps with surprising agility. She looked Emma up and down, taking in her condition and the obvious quality of her worn dress, then turned her attention to Timothy, who was still attempting to make friends with the cat. "I suppose you'd better come inside then," Mrs. Patterson said briskly. "Standing around in this heat won't do anyone any good, especially not a woman in your condition." As they walked toward the house, Jeremiah explained quietly to Emma, "Mrs. Patterson comes by 3 times a week to help with cooking and cleaning. She knew my wife, Sarah. She's got strong opinions about most things, but she's good people." The interior of the farmhouse was as meticulously maintained as the exterior. The front room was furnished simply but comfortably with a stone fireplace, handmade wooden furniture, and colorful quilts that added warmth to the space. Sunlight streamed through clean windows, revealing not a speck of dust on any surface. "Sit down before you fall down," Mrs. Patterson instructed Emma, gesturing toward a comfortable-looking armchair. "When's that baby due?" "About 6 weeks," Emma replied, sinking gratefully into the chair. The cushions were soft but supportive, clearly chosen with comfort in mind. Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. "First baby?" "Yes, Ma'am." "You'll need proper care then. Can't be taking chances with first babies." She turned to Jeremiah with a stern expression. "I suppose you've thought this through. Taking in a pregnant girl and a child?" Jeremiah met her gaze steadily. "I have." "And what exactly are your intentions here? Because if you think—" "My intentions," Jeremiah interrupted gently but firmly, "are to provide a safe place for people who need one. Nothing more, nothing less." Mrs. Patterson studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Good. Because Sarah would come back and haunt you if you did anything to shame her memory." The mention of his deceased wife brought a shadow across Jeremiah's features, but he simply nodded. "She would indeed." Timothy had been exploring the room with the cautious curiosity of a child in unfamiliar territory. He approached a bookshelf, lined with volumes of various sizes and ages, his eyes wide with wonder. "Do you like books?" Jeremiah asked, noticing the boy's interest. Timothy nodded eagerly. "Emmy taught me to read. She says books can take you anywhere you want to go." "That's very true," Jeremiah agreed. "You're welcome to look at any of those you'd like." While Timothy investigated the books, Mrs. Patterson bustled around the kitchen, which opened directly into the main living area. Soon, the smell of coffee and something baking filled the air. "Now then," Mrs. Patterson said, returning to the living room with a tray containing coffee, milk, and fresh cornbread. "Let's get some food into you. You're eating for 2 after all." Emma accepted the milk and cornbread gratefully. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she smelled the food. The cornbread was still warm from the oven, with a perfect golden crust and a tender, slightly sweet interior. "This is delicious," she said, her voice full of genuine appreciation. "It should be," Mrs. Patterson replied with satisfaction. "I've been making cornbread since before you were born. The secret is buttermilk and just a touch of honey." As Emma ate, she found herself relaxing for the first time in months. The combination of good food, comfortable surroundings, and the absence of Dale's threatening presence was almost overwhelming. She had to blink back tears as she realized that for the first time since her mother's death, she felt safe. Jeremiah sat across from her, drinking his coffee and watching her with quiet attention. There was something almost protective in his gaze, but without the possessiveness she'd grown to fear in men's eyes. "I should explain the arrangements," he said quietly. "There are 3 bedrooms upstairs. You and Timothy can have the 2 at the front of the house. They share a sitting area, so you'll have privacy, but he'll be close by. I use the room at the back," Emma looked up from her cornbread, surprised by his consideration. You don't have to. I mean, we could share a room. Timothy and I are used to that. There's no need, Jeremiah said firmly. You should have your own space, especially with the baby coming. Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. Sensible arrangement. A pregnant woman needs her rest, and children need room to be children. Timothy had selected a book about horses and brought it over to show Emma. Look, Emmy, this one has pictures of horses just like the ones outside. That was one of my favorites when I was your age, Jeremiah said. You can keep it in your room if you'd like. The boy's face lit up with joy. Really? It can be mine? As long as you take good care of it. Timothy nodded solemnly, clutching the book to his chest as if it were made of gold. It had been months since he'd had anything that was truly his own, and the gift clearly meant more to him than Jeremiah could have realized. As the afternoon wore on, Mrs. Patterson showed Emma and Timothy to their rooms. The space designated as Emma's was simply but comfortably furnished, with a brass bed covered in a quilt that looked handmade, a small dresser, and a rocking chair positioned near the window. Clean white curtains framed the window, and fresh flowers in a simple vase sat on the dresser. Sarah picked out most of this, Mrs. Patterson said quietly, running her hand along the quilt. She always said this room would be perfect for guests or, well, for a nursery someday. Emma felt a pang of sympathy for Jeremiah's loss, understanding now why he'd been willing to help strangers. Grief had a way of making people either bitter or compassionate, and clearly Jeremiah had chosen compassion. Timothy's room was smaller but equally cheerful, with built-in shelves perfect for books and toys, and a window that looked out over the barn and pastures. He immediately claimed a spot by the window where he could watch the horses. "Can I really stay here?" he asked Emma when Mrs. Patterson had left them alone. His voice was small and uncertain, as if he was afraid to hope for too much. "I think so, sweetheart," Emma replied, kneeling down to his level despite the awkwardness of her pregnant belly. "Mr. Caldwell seems like a good man." "Better than Dale?" "Much better than Dale." That evening, Mrs. Patterson prepared a dinner that seemed lavish after months of meager meals at Dale's house. There was roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from the garden, and apple pie for dessert. Emma ate until she was uncomfortably full, her body crying out for the nutrition it had been denied. Timothy chattered throughout the meal, his natural resilience allowing him to adapt quickly to their new circumstances. He told Jeremiah about the books he liked, asked questions about the farm animals, and shared stories about Emmy's cooking that made her blush. "Emmy makes the best pancakes in the whole world," he declared seriously. "She puts cinnamon in them and they taste like clouds." "I'd like to try those someday," Jeremiah said with a small smile. "If Emmy wouldn't mind sharing her recipe." "I'm sure that could be arranged," Emma said softly, touched by his gentle way with Timothy. After dinner, Mrs. Patterson announced that she would stay the night to help Emma get settled. "First night in a new place can be difficult," she said matter-of-factly, "especially for someone in your condition." As darkness fell, Jeremiah showed them around the immediate area of the farm, pointing out the well, the root cellar, and the path to the outhouse. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely familiar with his surroundings, but Emma noticed that he was careful to stay within her line of sight, as if he understood that trust would have to be earned gradually. "The horses are gentle," he told Timothy, who had been eyeing them longingly. "Tomorrow, if it's all right with your sister, I'll introduce you to them properly." Timothy looked to Emma for permission, his eyes bright with excitement. She nodded, and he practically bounced with joy. That night, as Emma tucked Timothy into his new bed, he wrapped his arms around her neck and whispered, "I like it here, Emmy. It feels like the kind of place where good things happen." "I hope so, sweetheart," she whispered back, kissing his forehead. "I really hope so." After Timothy fell asleep, Emma sat in the rocking chair in her room, looking out at the moonlit farmyard. The baby was active, moving and kicking as if it too sensed the change in their circumstances. She placed both hands on her belly and whispered to the child within. "I don't know what's going to happen next, little one," she said softly. "But for the first time in a long time, I think we might be safe." Downstairs, she could hear the murmur of voices as Jeremiah and Mrs. Patterson talked quietly in the kitchen. Their conversation was too low for her to make out the words, but the tone was serious and concerned. She wondered what they were saying. About her, about the wisdom of taking in strangers, about the challenges that lay ahead. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called quietly. Mrs. Patterson entered carrying a tray with a cup of tea and some crackers. "Thought you might be hungry again," she said. "Babies have a way of making their mothers hungry at odd hours." "Thank you," Emma said, accepting the tray gratefully. The tea was chamomile, soothing and warm. Mrs. Patterson sat on the edge of the bed, her expression thoughtful. "Jeremiah's a good man," she said without preamble. "Lost his way for a while after Sarah and the baby died, but he's finding it again. This might be good for all of you." "I hope I won't be a burden," Emma said quietly. "I can work. I'm not afraid of hard work." "I'm sure you're not. But right now, your job is to take care of yourself and that baby. Everything else can wait." As Mrs. Patterson left, Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the tea. For the first time in 2 years, since her mother's death, she felt like someone cared about her well-being without expecting anything in return. Outside her window, an owl called from the barn, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered. But instead of feeling frightened by the night sounds, Emma found them comforting. They were the sounds of a world where life continued, where tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not. She finished her tea and settled into the comfortable bed, pulling the handmade quilt up to her chin. The mattress was firm but supportive, so different from the lumpy, stained mattress she'd shared with Timothy at Dale's house. As sleep began to claim her, Emma allowed herself to imagine what life might be like if they could stay here permanently. Timothy running through the pastures, learning to care for animals, growing strong and confident, her baby taking first steps in the farmyard, learning to walk among chickens and flowers. And Jeremiah, she wasn't sure what to think about Jeremiah yet, but his quiet kindness was unlike anything she'd experienced from a man. For the first time in months, Emma fell asleep without fear, without wondering what tomorrow would bring, or whether she and Timothy would still be safe when morning came. In this house, in this bed, surrounded by the gentle sounds of a working farm, she finally felt like she could rest. Outside, Jeremiah stood on his front porch, looking up at the stars and thinking about the dramatic turn his life had taken in a single day. This morning, he'd been a solitary man focused only on the daily tasks of keeping his farm running. Tonight, he was responsible for 3 lives, including one that hadn't even been born yet. He thought about Sarah, wondering what she would have, made of his impulsive decision to bid on Emma and Timothy at the courthouse auction. Sarah had always had a soft heart for anyone in need, had been the one to take in stray cats and injured birds, to send food to neighbors who were struggling. A movement in the upstairs window caught his eye. Emma was standing there, silhouetted by moonlight, one hand resting on her pregnant belly. She seemed to be looking out at the farm, taking in her new surroundings. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a moment, neither moved. Then Emma raised her hand in a small wave, a gesture of gratitude and perhaps something else. Recognition, maybe, or hope. Jeremiah touched the brim of his hat in response, then turned and went inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions about how to navigate this unexpected family arrangement. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, his house felt like a home again. The first week at Jeremiah's farm passed like a cautious dance between strangers learning each other's rhythms. Emma woke each morning to the sound of roosters crowing and the gentle lowing of cattle being led to pasture, sounds that gradually replaced the anxiety that had plagued her sleep for months. Through her bedroom window, she could see Jeremiah, moving about his morning chores with the methodical precision of a man who had long ago established his routines. Timothy had adapted with the resilience that seemed built into children's bones. By the third day, he was following Jeremiah around like a shadow, peppering him with endless questions about farm life. Emma watched from the kitchen window as her little brother learned to scatter feed for the chickens, his face serious with concentration as Jeremiah showed him the proper technique. "Not too much in one spot," Jeremiah instructed patiently. "We want them to spread out so the smaller ones get their share too." Timothy nodded solemnly, adjusting his throwing pattern. "Like sharing at school?" Exactly like that. Emma found herself studying Jeremiah during these interactions, searching for signs of impatience or irritation that never came. Dale had barely been able to tolerate Timothy's presence, let alone his curiosity. But Jeremiah seemed genuinely interested in the boy's questions, answering each one thoughtfully as if Timothy's education was important business. Mrs. Patterson had returned to her regular schedule of coming 3 times a week, but she'd extended her hours to help Emma adjust to the household routines. The older woman had a no-nonsense approach to domestic life that Emma found both comforting and educational. "The trick to keeping a farm kitchen running smooth," Mrs. Patterson explained, as she taught Emma to use the wood-burning stove, "is to think ahead. Always have something cooking, something rising, something preserving. Idle time is wasted time when you're feeding working men." Emma absorbed these lessons eagerly, grateful to have something useful to occupy her mind and hands. At Dale's house, she'd done most of the cooking and cleaning out of necessity rather than choice, but here, contributing to the household felt like a privilege rather than a burden. The baby seemed to approve of the change in circumstances as well. The constant stress and poor nutrition of the previous months had made Emma's pregnancy difficult, marked by frequent nausea and exhaustion. But in the calm environment of the farm, with regular meals and peaceful sleep, she began to feel stronger. The baby's movements became more rhythmic, less frantic, as if it too was settling into a more secure existence. On Thursday morning of their first week, Emma ventured into the vegetable garden that stretched along the south side of the house. The plants were struggling against the drought, but Jeremiah had rigged an ingenious irrigation system, using channels carved into the earth and buckets positioned to catch rainwater from the roof. She was examining the tomato plants when she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Jeremiah approaching with a watering can in each hand. "Mrs. Patterson said you were interested in gardening," he said, setting the cans down near the rows of vegetables. "I helped my mother with her garden when I was younger," Emma replied, "before we moved to town with Dale." It was one of the few times she'd mentioned her past directly, and Jeremiah seemed to sense the significance. He didn't press for details, but simply handed her one of the watering cans. "These plants could use some attention," he said. "The drought's been hard on everything, but we've managed to keep most of them alive." They worked together in comfortable silence, moving methodically down the rows. Emma found the work soothing, the simple act of nurturing growing things a welcome change from the uncertainty that had dominated her recent life. The earth smelled rich and loamy despite its dryness, and the plants seemed to perk up gratefully. Under their care, "You have good instincts with plants," Jeremiah observed, as Emma carefully supported a drooping bean vine. "Your mother taught you well." "She said gardens were like people," Emma replied softly. "They need the right conditions to thrive, but mostly they just need someone to pay attention to them." Jeremiah paused in his watering, considering her words. "That's wise advice. She was a wise woman. I miss her every day." How long has she been gone? 2 years this fall. Cancer took her. Emma's voice caught slightly on the words. Dale was different when she was alive. He tried harder to be a good man because she saw the best in people. After she died, there wasn't anyone left to see the best in him. Jeremiah absorbed this information quietly, understanding beginning to dawn in his expression. That's when things got difficult for you and Timothy. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. She hadn't intended to share so much, but something about the peaceful garden setting and Jeremiah's patient attention had loosened her tongue. I'm sorry, Jeremiah said simply. Losing a mother is hard enough without having to take care of everyone else too. It was exactly the right thing to say. Acknowledgement without pity, understanding without judgment. Emma felt tears prick her eyes, but they were different from the tears she'd shed in recent months. These weren't tears of fear or desperation, but of relief at finally being heard. That afternoon, while Timothy napped and Mrs. Patterson worked, in the kitchen, Emma found herself alone with Jeremiah for the first time since their arrival. He was repairing a section of fence that the wind had damaged, and she brought him a glass of cold water from the well. Thank you, he said, accepting the glass gratefully. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the shade of his hat, and his shirt was damp with exertion. Emma settled herself carefully on a nearby tree stump, mindful of her growing belly. Can I ask you something? Jeremiah nodded, taking another long drink of water. Why did you really bid on us at the auction? I mean, the real reason. Jeremiah was quiet for so long that Emma began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low she had to strain to hear him. 3 years ago, I buried my wife and daughter on the same day, he said, his hands still working on the fence wire. Sarah died in childbirth, and the baby, Rose, she only lived for a few hours. Emma's heart clenched with sympathy. I'm so sorry. For a long time after that, I convinced myself that caring about people was too dangerous, that it was better to keep to myself, not get attached to anyone or anything that could be lost. He paused, looking out across his fields. But when I saw you and Timothy on that platform, saw the way you were protecting him even though you were terrified yourself, it reminded me that some things are worth the risk. What if we disappoint you? What if this doesn't work out the way you hope? Jeremiah finally looked at her directly, his grey eyes serious but kind. Then at least I'll know I tried to do something good, instead of just hiding from the world. Emma felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. This man had taken an enormous gamble on 2 strangers, not because he expected anything in return, but because he believed in the possibility of goodness. I want to earn your kindness, she said quietly. I want to be worth the risk you took. You already are, Jeremiah replied without hesitation. Both of you, just by being here, by bringing life back to this house. That evening, Mrs. Patterson taught Emma to milk the cows, a skill that proved more challenging than it looked. The cows seemed enormous and intimidating up close, and Emma's pregnant belly made it difficult to position herself correctly on the milking stool. Don't be afraid of them, Mrs. Patterson instructed. Cows can sense fear, and it makes them nervous. Be confident but gentle, like you're greeting an old friend. After several awkward attempts, Emma finally managed to establish a rhythm. The warm milk pinged steadily into the metal bucket, and she felt a surge of accomplishment at mastering this new skill. Very good, Mrs. Patterson said approvingly. You have steady hands. That'll serve you well with farm work. Timothy had been watching the milking lesson with fascination, and when Emma was finished, he begged to try. Under careful supervision, he managed to extract a few squirts of milk, giggling with delight at his success. Can I help with the milking every day? He asked Emma eagerly. If Mr. Caldwell doesn't mind, she replied, looking to Jeremiah for permission. I think that would be very helpful, Jeremiah said seriously. Every farm needs reliable help with the milking. Timothy beamed with pride at being given real responsibility, and Emma felt her heart swell with gratitude for Jeremiah's natural understanding of what children needed to thrive. That night, after Timothy had fallen asleep, Emma sat in her rocking chair, working on a small blanket she was knitting for the baby. The wool was soft, cream-colored yarn that Mrs. Patterson had found in Sarah's sewing basket, offered with the gentle suggestion that it should be put to good use. A soft knock at her door interrupted her knitting. "Come in," she called quietly. Jeremiah appeared in the doorway, looking somewhat uncertain. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I brought you something." He held out a small wooden box, beautifully crafted with smooth joints and a fitted lid. Emma set down her knitting and accepted the box, running her fingers over the satiny wood. "It's beautiful," she said. "Did you make this?" Jeremiah nodded, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. "It was going to be a jewelry box for Sarah, but I never got to finish it before. I thought maybe you could use it for the baby's things, first shoes maybe, or a lock of hair." Emma opened the box to reveal the interior lined with soft blue fabric. It was clearly the work of skilled hands and a loving heart, and she felt overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Are you sure?" she asked. "This was meant for your wife. Sarah would have wanted it to be used for something good," Jeremiah said firmly. "She always said that love shouldn't be wasted on the past when it could be building the future." Emma traced the smooth edge of the box with one finger, thinking about the woman who had been meant to receive it. What was she like? Sarah. Jeremiah's expression grew soft with memory. She laughed a lot. At everything. My terrible jokes. The chickens. When they got into the vegetable garden. Herself, when she burned the biscuits. She made even ordinary days feel special somehow. She sounds wonderful. She was, but she's been gone for 3 years now, and I'm starting to think she'd want me to stop living in the past. He paused, meeting Emma's eyes. "I think she'd like you." She always had a soft spot for people who were braver than they knew they were. After Jeremiah left, Emma sat holding the wooden box and thinking about courage. She'd never considered herself particularly brave. Most of the time, she felt like she was just trying to survive from one day to the next. But maybe Jeremiah was right. Maybe there was courage in protecting Timothy, in accepting help when it was offered, in daring to hope for something better. The next morning brought their first real test as a household. Emma woke to the sound of Timothy crying, a sound that immediately sent her into alert mode. She hurried to his room to find him sitting up in bed, clutching his stomach. "It hurts, Emmy," he whimpered. "My tummy hurts really bad." Emma felt his forehead. He was burning with fever. Her mother's instincts kicked in, and she began mentally cataloguing symptoms and possible causes. Timothy had been perfectly fine the night before, eating a good dinner and playing normally. "What kind of hurt?" she asked gently, trying to keep the worry out of her voice. "Sharp like a knife or achy like when you eat too much?" "Sharp," Timothy said, tears streaming down his flushed cheeks. "And I feel sick." Emma's heart began to race. Sharp abdominal pain and fever in a child could indicate any number of serious conditions, some of which required immediate medical attention. She helped Timothy lie back down and covered him with a light sheet. "I'm going to get Mr. Caldwell," she said. "He might know what to do." She found Jeremiah in the barn, already at work with the morning chores. One look at her face told him something was wrong. "Timothy's sick," she said without preamble. "Fever and sharp stomach pains. I don't know what to do. Should we take him to town? Is there a doctor?" Jeremiah set down his tools immediately. "There's a doctor in Millbrook, but let me take a look first. I've had some experience with sick animals. The principles aren't that different." They hurried back to the house, where Timothy was now curled up in a ball, moaning softly. Jeremiah approached the bed with calm authority, his manner soothing but professional. "Hey there, partner," he said gently. "I hear you're not feeling too good." Timothy nodded miserably. "Everything hurts." "I'm going to feel your stomach, okay? I'll be very gentle, but you tell me if anything hurts worse when I touch it." Jeremiah's examination was thorough but careful, his hands moving expertly over Timothy's abdomen while he asked quiet questions about symptoms and timing. Emma watched anxiously, impressed by his calm competence in a crisis. "Well," Jeremiah said finally, straightening up with a small smile, "I have good news and bad news. The good news is I don't think this is anything serious. The bad news is I think someone ate too many green apples yesterday." Emma felt relief flood through her. "Green apples? There's a tree behind the barn that drops fruit early. I caught him sampling them yesterday afternoon, but I didn't think he'd eaten enough to cause trouble." Jeremiah turned back to Timothy. "How many apples did you eat, partner? And remember, honesty is important when you're sick." Timothy looked sheepish despite his discomfort. "Maybe 5? They tasted really good." 5 green apples would definitely make anyone's stomach hurt," Jeremiah said, with gentle understanding. "The good news is this will pass in a day or two. The bad news is you're going to feel pretty miserable until it does." Emma sank into the chair beside Timothy's bed, weak with relief. She'd been terrified that something serious was wrong, that they might lose him just when they'd found safety. "I should have been watching him more carefully," she said, guilt coloring her voice. "Boys and green apples have been finding each other since the beginning of time," Jeremiah assured her. "It's practically a law of nature. The important thing is he's learned his lesson. Haven't you, Timothy?" Timothy nodded emphatically. "No more green apples. Ever." "Maybe not ever," Jeremiah said with a gentle smile, "but definitely not 5 at once." Mrs. Patterson arrived shortly after and immediately took charge of Timothy's care, producing remedies from her seemingly endless store of practical knowledge. She made him tea from mint leaves and had him sip small amounts of warm broth throughout the day. "Stomach troubles are miserable, but they're not dangerous if you know how to manage them," she told Emma as they prepared a simple meal in the kitchen. "The key is keeping him hydrated and letting his system rest." Emma found herself watching Jeremiah throughout the day, noting how naturally he'd stepped into a caretaking role with Timothy. He checked on the boy regularly, bringing him books to look at and even carving a small whistle to keep him entertained while he recovered. "You're good with children," Emma observed that evening, as Jeremiah sat reading to Timothy from a book about cowboys. "I always hoped to have a house full of them someday," Jeremiah replied quietly. "Before Sarah died, we used to talk about the children we'd have, the kind of family we wanted to build." "Do you still want that? A family?" Jeremiah was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I'm starting to think maybe I already have one," he said finally, his eyes moving from Timothy to Emma. "Just not the way I expected." Emma felt her heart skip at his words, but before she could respond, Timothy piped up from his sickbed. "Are we a family now?" he asked with the directness that only children possessed. "What do you think?" Jeremiah asked, turning the question back to him. Timothy considered this seriously. "I think families are people who take care of each other when they're sick and who share their apples even when they're not green. So yes, I think we're a family." Emma felt tears prick her eyes at the simple wisdom of her little brother's words. Maybe Timothy was right. Maybe family wasn't just about blood or legal documents, but about the daily choice to care for each other, to show up when it mattered, to create safety in an uncertain world. That night, as she sat knitting in her rocking chair, Emma reflected on how much had changed in just 1 week. Timothy was recovering well from his apple adventure, already making plans to help Jeremiah with the farm work. The baby had been active all day, as if it too was settling into this new rhythm of life, and Emma herself felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Not the desperate kind that grasps at any possibility of escape, but the quiet, steady kind that believes in tomorrow, that dares to make plans beyond mere survival. Outside her window, she could see Jeremiah making his final rounds of the farm, checking on the animals and securing anything that needed securing for the night. His movements were unhurried, but thorough, the actions of a man who took responsibility seriously. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new moments of uncertainty as they continued to learn how to be a family. But tonight, in this house filled with the sound of Timothy's peaceful breathing and the subtle presence of growing life, Emma allowed herself to believe that they might actually make this work. The baby kicked strongly, as if in agreement, and Emma smiled as she placed her hand over the movement. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered. "Are you ready to be part of this family too?" The answer came in the form of another solid kick, and Emma laughed softly, the sound carrying through the quiet house like a promise of joy to come. 3 weeks into their new life at the farm, Emma woke to the sound of rain drumming against her bedroom window. It was the first substantial rainfall Millbrook County had seen in months, and the entire farm seemed to exhale with relief. She could hear Jeremiah moving about downstairs, his boots clicking against the kitchen floor as he prepared for the day's work. The baby had been restless all night, turning and kicking, as if it too sensed the change in weather. Emma placed both hands on her swollen belly, marveling at how much stronger the movements had become. Mrs. Patterson had examined her the previous week and declared both mother and child to be thriving. "That baby's going to be a strong one," the older woman had said with satisfaction. "Good size, active, right where it should be for 7.5 months. The good food and peaceful environment are doing their work." Emma had felt a surge of pride at the assessment. For months, she'd worried that the stress and poor nutrition of her life with Dale might have harmed her unborn child. But here, surrounded by Jeremiah's quiet care and Mrs. Patterson's practical wisdom, both she and the baby seemed to be flourishing. Timothy burst into her room without knocking, his face bright with excitement. "Emmy, it's raining, real rain, not just the little drops that tease you." Emma smiled at his enthusiasm. Timothy had adapted to farm life with the boundless energy of childhood, throwing himself into every new experience with joy. Yesterday, Jeremiah had taught him to harness the gentle mare named Buttercup, and Timothy had spent the evening practicing the knots until his small fingers could manage them perfectly. "I can see that, sweetheart," Emma said, sitting up carefully. "What time is it?" "Jeremiah's already doing the milking. He said I could help him today if I wanted to, and I do want to, but I wanted to tell you about the rain first because you love rain, and I thought you'd want to know." Emma's heart warmed at Timothy's thoughtfulness. Even in his excitement, he'd thought of her happiness first. "You'd better get dressed then, if you're going to help with the milking." And Timothy, "Yeah? Thank you for thinking of me." Timothy beamed and scampered back to his room to get dressed. Emma took her time getting ready, listening to the steady patter of rain and feeling more hopeful than she had in years. Rain meant the drought might be breaking, which would be good news for everyone in the county. Downstairs, she found Jeremiah in the kitchen, dividing milk into various containers for different purposes. His dark hair was damp from the rain, and there was a lightness in his expression that she hadn't seen before. "Good morning," he said, looking up as she entered. "I hope the rain didn't keep you awake." "Actually, I found it soothing," Emma replied, moving to the stove to start breakfast. "It's been so long since we've had a proper rain." "This could break the drought if it keeps up," Jeremiah said, hope evident in his voice. "The pastures desperately need it, and the vegetable garden will come back to life." As if summoned by the mention of the garden, Mrs. Patterson appeared in the kitchen doorway, shaking raindrops from her shawl. She came earlier on rainy days, she'd explained, because there was more indoor work to be done when outdoor chores were limited. Well, glory be, she said with satisfaction. Finally, some decent weather. Jeremiah, you'll want to check the rain barrels. They'll be overflowing if this keeps up. Already on my list, Jeremiah assured her. Timothy's helping. Me with the morning rounds today. That boy's becoming quite the little farmer, Mrs. Patterson observed. Yesterday, I saw him explaining to the chickens why they needed to stay in their coop during the storm. Had a whole conversation with them, serious as you please. Emma laughed, able to picture Timothy's earnest discussion with the poultry. He'd developed strong opinions about the proper care of farm animals and wasn't shy about sharing them. The morning routine proceeded with the comfortable efficiency they'd developed over the past weeks. Emma prepared breakfast while Mrs. Patterson organized the day's indoor tasks. When Jeremiah and Timothy returned from their chores, both were soaked but cheerful. The rain gauge is already at 2 inches, Jeremiah announced, hanging his wet jacket on a peg by the door. If this continues through the day, it'll be the most rain we've had since spring. Timothy ran upstairs to change into dry clothes, chattering excitedly about everything he'd observed during the morning chores. Emma watched Jeremiah towel his hair dry, noting the way his shoulders had relaxed since the rain began. She was beginning to understand that the farm's well-being was tied directly to his own sense of peace. "You really love this place, don't you?" she said, as she set plates of scrambled eggs and biscuits on the table. "It's been my life for 10 years now," Jeremiah replied. "Sarah and I bought it right after we married, planned to build something lasting here. Even after she died, I couldn't imagine being anywhere else." Emma poured coffee for both of them, then settled carefully into her chair. The baby had dropped lower in recent days, making sitting more comfortable, but walking more awkward. "What was your dream for this place?" "When you and Sarah were planning," Jeremiah's expression grew thoughtful as he considered the question. "We wanted a working farm that could support a large family. Sarah came from a family of 8 children, and she wanted the same kind of bustling household. Children everywhere, always something going on, neighbors stopping by for dinner without invitation." "That sounds wonderful," Emma said wistfully. "My mother always wanted more children, but after Timothy was born, there were complications. The doctor said it would be dangerous for her to have another baby." "Is that why she was so protective of Timothy?" Emma nodded. "He was her miracle baby, born when the doctors said it was impossible. She used to say he was proof that sometimes the universe gives you exactly what you need, even when you think it's too late." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the rain and Timothy's footsteps overhead as he changed clothes. Emma found herself studying Jeremiah's profile, noting the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he hadn't always been as serious as he appeared now. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said finally. "Of course. Do you ever regret bidding on us at the auction? I mean, your life was probably simpler before." Jeremiah set down his coffee cup and looked at her directly. "Emma, in the 3 weeks you and Timothy have been here, I've laughed more than I have in the past 3 years. This house has life in it again. How could I regret that?" Before Emma could respond, Timothy thundered down the stairs in fresh clothes, his hair sticking up in all directions. He slid into his chair and immediately began describing everything he'd learned about rain collection and soil absorption. "And Jeremiah said that if the rain keeps up, we might be able to plant a winter garden," Timothy concluded breathlessly. "Can I help plant it, Emmy? Please?" "I think that sounds like a wonderful idea," Emma replied, touched by his enthusiasm for their new life. After breakfast, the rain continued with steady determination. Mrs. Patterson declared it a perfect day for indoor projects and set Emma to work mending clothes while she tackled the weekly bread baking. Timothy established himself at the kitchen table with his books and the wooden horse Jeremiah had given him, creating elaborate stories that he shared with anyone willing to listen. Jeremiah disappeared into what he called his workshop, a room off the main house that Emma had only glimpsed from the doorway. She could hear the occasional sound of hammering and sawing interspersed with Timothy's chatter when the boy wandered in to observe. "What's he working on in there?" Emma asked Mrs. Patterson during a quiet moment. "Could be anything," Mrs. Patterson replied, kneading bread dough with practiced efficiency. "Jeremiah's always been handy with wood, made most of the furniture in this house, plus half the tools he uses for farming, keeps his hands busy when his mind gets restless." Around midday, Jeremiah emerged from the workshop carrying something covered with a cloth. Timothy trailed behind him, practically bouncing with excitement. "We made something for you," Timothy announced. "Well, Jeremiah made it, but I helped. Sand it and everything." Jeremiah set the covered object on the kitchen table, looking slightly embarrassed. "It's not much, but Mrs. Patterson mentioned you'd been having trouble getting comfortable at night, and I thought this might help." He pulled away the cloth to reveal a beautiful wooden footstool, perfectly sized for someone in Emma's condition. The wood was smooth as silk, with gently curved legs and a padded top covered in soft fabric. Emma stared at the gift, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness behind it. She'd mentioned to Mrs. Patterson just once that her swollen feet had been bothering her, and somehow that casual comment had made its way to Jeremiah and transformed into this perfect solution. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed. "It's beautiful." "Try it," Timothy urged. "Jeremiah measured it special so it would be just right for you." Emma tested the footstool, finding it exactly the right height to support her feet comfortably, while sitting in her rocking chair. The padding was firm but yielding, and the whole piece radiated the same quiet craftsmanship she'd noticed in everything Jeremiah made. "How did you know exactly what I needed?" she asked, looking up at him with wonder. Jeremiah's cheeks colored slightly. "I watched you trying to get comfortable in the evenings. Figured proper support might help." It was such a simple explanation, but it revealed the depth of attention he'd been paying to her welfare. Emma felt tears prick her eyes, hormones and gratitude combining into an emotional surge. "You've been watching out for me," she said softly. "Someone should," Jeremiah replied simply. "You're carrying precious cargo." That afternoon, while Timothy napped and Mrs. Patterson worked on her bread, Emma found herself alone with Jeremiah. In the sitting room, the rain had settled into a gentle, steady rhythm, and the house felt cozy and secure around them. Emma had taken up her knitting again, working on a small sweater for the baby. Jeremiah sat across from her, mending a bridle with the same careful attention he brought to all his tasks. The silence between them was comfortable, broken only by the soft sounds of their respective work. "Jeremiah," Emma said finally, not looking up from her knitting, "can I tell you something?" "Always." "I've been thinking about names for the baby, and I wondered, would it be all right if I used Sarah for a girl's middle name? I mean, if you wouldn't mind." Jeremiah's hands stilled on the leather he was working. When Emma looked up, she saw that his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Sarah would be honored," he said quietly. "She always said names should connect children to the people who loved them. And if it's a boy, I was thinking maybe James. That was my father's name. He died when I was 10, but he was a good man. Kind and gentle, like you." The comparison seemed to affect Jeremiah deeply. He set down his work and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Emma," he said carefully, "you know you don't owe me anything, right? Not gratitude, not anything. You and Timothy are here because you deserve to be safe and cared for, not because you need to earn your place." "I know that," Emma replied, "but I want to honor the people who've shown us love. Sarah's memory, my father's kindness, your generosity. Those things matter." "They do matter," Jeremiah agreed, "more than you know." As the afternoon wore on, Emma found herself sharing more stories from her childhood, memories of her parents, and the happy years before her father's death changed everything. Jeremiah listened with the same careful attention he brought to everything, asking thoughtful questions that showed he was truly interested in understanding her past. My father used to say that a person's character was revealed in how they treated people who couldn't do anything for them in return, Emma said, working a complicated stitch in the baby's sweater. He judged people by their kindness to children, animals, and strangers. Wise man, Jeremiah observed. What would he think of your current situation? Emma considered this seriously. I think he'd be proud that I found a way to protect Timothy, and I think he'd approve of you. He always said that real strength was gentle strength, the kind that lifts people up instead of tearing them down. I hope I can live up to that standard. You already do, Emma said with conviction. Every day, in dozens of small ways. That evening, Timothy announced that he wanted to cook dinner for everyone. Mrs. Patterson supervised while he prepared a simple meal of soup and cornbread, his face serious with concentration as he stirred and measured. Cooking is another kind of taking care of people, he explained to Emma as he worked. Like how you took care of me when I was sick with the apples. Emma watched her little brother's careful ministrations, marveling at how much he'd grown in confidence since they'd arrived at the farm. The anxious, fearful child who'd clung to her at the auction was transforming into a boy who believed in his own abilities and worth. After dinner, they gathered in the sitting room while the rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows. Timothy curled up on the floor with his wooden horse and a picture book, while Emma settled into her rocking chair with the new footstool providing perfect support. Jeremiah had brought out his guitar, an instrument Emma hadn't known he played. His fingers moved over the strings with the same careful precision he brought to everything, coaxing gentle melodies from the worn wood. That's beautiful, Emma said as he finished a soft instrumental piece. Where did you learn to play? My father taught me, Jeremiah replied. Said music was important for keeping the soul fed during hard times. Would you play something with words? I love songs with stories. Jeremiah considered for a moment, then began playing a folk ballad about a sailor returning home after a long voyage. His voice was warm and melodious, perfectly suited to the gentle song. Timothy looked up from his book, drawn by the music. That's about coming home, Timothy observed when the song ended. It is, Jeremiah agreed. What made you think of that? Because that's what this feels like, Timothy said, with the simple honesty that children possessed. Like we've been on a long trip, and now we're home. Emma felt her throat tighten with emotion. Timothy had captured something she'd been feeling but hadn't been able to articulate. This house, this life they were building together, felt like the home she'd been searching for without even knowing it. Will you play another one? She asked Jeremiah. He nodded and began a gentle lullaby, his voice soft and soothing. Timothy's eyelids grew heavy as the melody washed over him, and eventually Emma had to wake him gently to send him up to bed. After Timothy had gone upstairs, Emma and Jeremiah sat together in the firelit room, listening to the rain and the comfortable sounds of a house settling for the night. The baby was active, responding to the day's emotional richness with energetic movements. May I? Jeremiah asked quietly, gesturing toward her belly. Emma nodded, surprised by the request, but trusting his gentle intentions. Jeremiah moved his chair closer and placed one large hand carefully on her swollen abdomen. The baby immediately kicked against his palm, as if responding to his presence. Strong, Jeremiah murmured, wonder in his voice. Very strong. Sometimes I think this baby knows more about what's happening than the rest of us do, Emma said softly. It's like it's been waiting for the right time and place to be born. Maybe it has been, Jeremiah replied, his hand still resting gently on her belly. Maybe it knew it needed to wait for a real home. Emma looked at Jeremiah in the flickering firelight, seeing not just the kind man who had rescued them, but someone who was becoming infinitely precious to her. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. She was falling in love with him, had been for weeks without fully acknowledging it. "Jeremiah," she said quietly. "Yes? Thank you for making us feel like we belong here, for making us feel like a family." Jeremiah's eyes met hers, and in them she saw the same growing affection she felt in her own heart. "You do belong here, Emma, both of you. This house has been waiting for you." Outside, the rain continued its gentle blessing on the drought-stricken land, promising renewal and growth. Inside the warm farmhouse, two hearts that had been broken by loss began to heal in the presence of unexpected love, while upstairs, a child slept peacefully, dreaming of horses and green pastures and the security of being wanted. The baby kicked once more against Jeremiah's palm, and Emma smiled, placing her hand over his. "I think someone approves of our arrangement," she said softly. "I hope so," Jeremiah replied, "because I can't imagine my life without either of you anymore." As the evening drew to a close and they prepared to go to their separate rooms, Emma felt a contentment she'd never experienced before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but tonight, surrounded by love and the promise of rain-soaked earth, she felt truly blessed. The baby settled into quietness as if it too was content, and Emma drifted off to sleep with Jeremiah's gentle lullaby still echoing in her mind and the sound of healing rain singing against her window. 5 weeks had passed since the auction when Sheriff Thomas McKenna rode up the dusty path to Jeremiah's farm. Emma was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she spotted the approaching rider, and her heart immediately clenched with dread. In her experience, unexpected visits from law enforcement rarely brought good news. She called out to Jeremiah, who was working in the vegetable garden that had flourished since the recent rains. He looked up at the urgency in her voice, saw the sheriff approaching, and immediately set down his hoe. Timothy was playing near the chicken coop with a wooden truck Jeremiah had carved for him, blissfully unaware of the tension that had suddenly filled the air. Sheriff McKenna was a tall, lean man in his 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of too many difficult conversations. He'd been friends with Jeremiah for years, which made the formality in his expression all the more concerning. "Afternoon, Jeremiah," the sheriff said, dismounting from his horse. "Emma." He touched his hat politely, but his manner was strictly professional. "Tom," Jeremiah replied, wiping his hands on his work pants. "What brings you out this way?" Emma moved closer, instinctively positioning herself where she could see Timothy while staying within earshot of the conversation. The baby had been restless all morning, as if sensing her anxiety, and now her worst fears seemed to be materializing. "I'm afraid I'm here on official business," Sheriff McKenna said, pulling a folded document from his shirt pocket. "I've got papers here from Judge Morrison. There's been a complaint filed." Jeremiah's jaw tightened. "What kind of complaint?" "Dale Brennan saying you took his stepdaughter and her brother under false pretenses. He's claiming the auction wasn't legal, that he was coerced into the sale because he was intoxicated." Emma felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "But that's not true," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dale was drunk, yes, but he organized the whole thing. He wanted to get rid of us." Sheriff McKenna's expression was sympathetic but troubled. "I'm not saying I believe him, Emma, but he's filed a formal complaint with the county, and there are some legal complications we need to sort out." "What kind of complications?" Jeremiah asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Well, for starters, the legality of selling people is questionable at best, even with guardianship papers. The railroad brought new laws with it, and there are folks in the state capitol asking uncomfortable questions about some of the practices in the outer counties." Emma's legs felt weak. She sank onto the porch steps, one hand pressed to her belly. where the baby was now kicking frantically, as if it too sensed the danger. "What does that mean for Emma and Timothy?" Jeremiah asked. Sheriff McKenna sighed heavily. "Dale's demanding their return. He's claiming he made a mistake, that he was taken advantage of in his grief over his wife's death. Says he wants to make amends and provide proper care for his stepchildren." "That's a lie," Emma said fiercely, finding her voice. "Dale never showed us anything but contempt. He sold us because he wanted to be rid of the burden." "I believe you," Sheriff McKenna said gently, "but belief and legal proof are two different things. Dale's got witnesses from the saloon who'll swear he was devastated about having to sell you, that he was forced into it by debts and desperation." Timothy had noticed the serious conversation and approached cautiously, his wooden truck clutched against his chest. "Emmy, is something wrong?" Emma forced a smile for his benefit. "Just grown-up talk, sweetheart. Why don't you go play in the barn for a while?" But Timothy was too perceptive to be fooled. His eyes darted between the adults, reading the tension in their faces. "Are we in trouble?" "No, honey," Emma said, though her voice shook slightly. "We're not in trouble." Sheriff McKenna knelt down to Timothy's level, his official demeanor softening. "Hey there, Timothy. I'm Sheriff McKenna. I knew your mama when she was young." Timothy's eyes widened with interest. "You did?" "I did indeed. She was one of the kindest people I ever knew. You look just like her." The compliment brought a shy smile to Timothy's face, but he remained pressed close to Emma's side. "Timothy," Sheriff McKenna continued gently, "I need to ask you some questions, okay? About living here with Mr. Caldwell. Has he been good to you?" Timothy nodded emphatically. "He's the best. He taught me to milk cows and catch fireflies and whittle wood, and he never yells, not even when I accidentally let the chickens out." "That's good to hear. And your sister, has she been happy here?" "Emmy smiles all the time now," Timothy said seriously. "She didn't smile much at Dale's house, but here she laughs and sings to the baby and teaches me pancake recipes." Sheriff McKenna looked up at Emma with something like relief in his eyes. "That's important testimony, Timothy. Thank you for being honest with me." After Timothy went to play in the barn as Emma had suggested, the adults resumed their discussion with greater urgency. "What exactly is Dale claiming?" Jeremiah asked. "He says you took advantage of a grieving man's desperation. Claims he was drinking because he was distraught about having to separate the children, that he never would have agreed to the sale if he'd been sober. And the witnesses will back that up. Men he's been buying drinks for ever since he got your money," Sheriff McKenna confirmed grimly. "Funny how generous a man can be when he wants friends to remember things a certain way." Emma felt sick to her stomach. "So what happens now?" "Well, there's going to be a hearing. Judge Morrison wants to review the case, determine whether the original sale was legal, and whether Dale has grounds for demanding your return." "When?" Jeremiah asked. "Next Friday, 1 week from today." Emma pressed both hands to her belly, feeling panic rise in her throat. "And until then?" "Until then, you stay here," Sheriff McKenna said firmly. "But Emma, I have to warn you, if the judge rules in Dale's favor, I'll have no choice but to enforce his decision." The implications of this hung heavy in the air. Emma would be forced to return to Dale's house, pregnant and vulnerable, with Timothy in tow. All the safety and happiness they'd found would be stripped away by legal decree. "There has to be something we can do," Jeremiah said desperately. "Some way to fight this." Sheriff McKenna was quiet for a long moment. "There might be, but it would require Emma to make some difficult decisions." "What kind of decisions?" The sheriff looked directly at Emma. "You could marry Jeremiah. If you were his legal wife, Dale would have no claim on you, and as Jeremiah's stepson, Timothy would be protected as well." Emma felt her heart skip at the suggestion. Marriage to Jeremiah? Something she'd begun to dream about in her private moments, but not like this, not as a desperate legal maneuver. Would that work? Jeremiah asked quietly. It should. Marriage would supersede any previous guardianship arrangements. But Sheriff McKenna hesitated. But what? It would have to be a real marriage, legally and in every other way. If there's any suggestion that it's a sham arrangement just to circumvent the law, Judge Morrison would see right through it. Emma looked at Jeremiah, trying to read his expression. Was he willing to marry her to save them from Dale? And if so, would it be out of love or mere obligation? I need to think about this, Emma said quietly. Of course you do, Sheriff McKenna agreed, but don't take too long. Once the hearing starts, it'll be too late. After the sheriff left, an uncomfortable silence settled over the farm. Emma sat on the porch steps, staring out at the fields that had begun to feel like home, while Jeremiah paced the yard like a caged animal. I won't let him take you back, Jeremiah said finally, his voice tight with emotion. I won't let Dale Brennan destroy what we've built here. It might not be up to you, Emma replied sadly. Or me. The law is the law. Then we'll change our relationship to the law. Emma looked up at him, searching his face. You'd really marry me, just to keep us safe? Jeremiah stopped pacing and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. Emma, I wouldn't be marrying you just to keep you safe. I'd be marrying you because I love you, because I can't imagine my life without you and Timothy in it. The legal protection would just be a bonus. Emma's heart leaped at his words, but doubt lingered. You love me? I've loved you since that second week when I found you crying over the baby blanket you were knitting and you told me you were afraid you wouldn't be a good mother. How could I not love someone so determined to do right by everyone she cares about? Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks. I love you too. I've been afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon or too complicated or... Jeremiah silenced her with a gentle kiss. Their first. It was soft and careful, full of tenderness and promise. Then marry me, he said against her lips, not because we have to, but because we want to, because we're already a family in every way that matters. Before Emma could answer, Timothy's voice cut through the moment. Are you kissing Emmy? They broke apart to find Timothy standing a few feet away, his expression more curious than shocked. We are, Jeremiah said honestly. Does that mean you love her? Very much. Timothy considered this seriously. Good. I love her too, and I love you so. If you get married, does that mean you'll be my real papa? Jeremiah's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. If you want me to be. I do, Timothy said simply. Can we do it soon? Before that mean sheriff comes back? Emma laughed, despite her tears. Sheriff McKenna isn't mean, sweetheart. He's just doing his job. But yes, if we're going to get married, it should be soon. That evening, Mrs. Patterson arrived for her usual visit and immediately sensed the tension in the household. When they explained the situation, her reaction was swift and decisive. Well, of course you'll marry him, she said to Emma, as if there were no other reasonable option. Anyone with eyes can see you two are meant for each other, and that baby deserves to be born into a proper family. But is it fair to Jeremiah? Emma asked. To tie him to someone else's problems? Mrs. Patterson snorted. Child, that man has been more alive in the past 5 weeks than he has in 3 years. You're not tying him to problems, you're giving him back his life. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. They would be married by Pastor Williams at the small church in Millbrook, with Mrs. Patterson and the pastor's wife as witnesses. It would be a simple ceremony, but Emma found herself looking forward to it with a mixture of joy and nervous anticipation. Jeremiah rode to town to speak with a lawyer about the legal implications of their marriage and how it would affect Dale's claim. The news was encouraging. Once they were legally wed, Dale would have no standing to demand Emma's return, and Timothy would be protected as Jeremiah's stepson. "What about the money Dale received?" Emma asked when Jeremiah returned with this information. "Won't he have to return it?" "That's between him and his conscience," Jeremiah replied. "As far as I'm concerned, it was well spent." 3 days before the scheduled hearing, Vincent Russo appeared at the farm. Emma was alone in the house, with Jeremiah out checking fence lines and Timothy at the neighbors helping with their harvest. She answered the knock at the door to find the well-dressed man from the auction standing on her porch, his expensive clothes at odds with the rural setting. "Miss Harrison," he said with an oily smile, "how lovely to see you again." Emma's blood ran cold. "Mr. Russo, what are you doing here?" "I've come to make you an offer. A generous one." "I'm not interested in anything you have to say." Emma tried to close the door, but Russo placed his hand against it, preventing her from shutting him out. "I think you should hear me out," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I've been talking to your stepfather, and he's told me some interesting things about your situation here. Such as the fact that your arrangement with Mr. Caldwell isn't entirely legal, and that you might be facing some difficulties in the near future." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't know what Dale told you, but he told me that you're going to be returned to his custody very soon. And when that happens, you'll need someone to take care of you and that baby you're carrying. Get off this property," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm offering you an alternative," Russo continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "Come with me now, voluntarily, and I'll make sure you're well cared for. You and the child. I run a very profitable establishment, and there's always demand for domestic help." Emma understood the euphemism and felt nauseated. "Never." "Think carefully, Miss Harrison. Your stepfather is going to win his case. You'll be returned to his custody, and he's already promised to sell you to me for twice what Caldwell paid. You can come with me now and avoid the unpleasantness of a legal battle, or you can wait and be forced to come anyway." "I'd rather die first." Russo's smile turned cold. "That can be arranged too. Childbirth is dangerous, especially for women who don't receive proper care." It was a threat, thinly veiled but unmistakable. Emma's hands instinctively moved to protect her belly. "Now then," Russo continued in a more reasonable tone, "why don't you pack a few things and come with me? We can be gone before Caldwell returns, and you can spare everyone a lot of trouble." The lady said no. Both Emma and Russo turned to see Jeremiah approaching from the barn, his face dark with fury. He carried a pitchfork in his hands, and there was something in his expression that made Russo take a step back. "Mr. Caldwell," Russo said, attempting to regain his composure, "I was just offering Miss Harrison some alternatives to her current situation." "Get off my land," Jeremiah said quietly, his voice carrying more menace than if he'd shouted. "I don't think you understand the legal realities. I understand that you're threatening a pregnant woman on my property. I also understand that you're not going to be here when I count to 10. Russo looked between Jeremiah's determined face and the sharp tines of the pitchfork, then apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor. "This isn't over," he said to Emma as he backed toward his fancy carriage. "One way or another, you'll be working for me soon." After Russo left, Emma collapsed into Jeremiah's arms, shaking with fear and reaction. "He knows about the hearing," she said through her tears. "He's working with Dale. They're planning to split the money when the judge rules in Dale's favor." "That's not going to happen," Jeremiah said firmly, holding her close. "We're getting married tomorrow, first thing in the morning. I'm not waiting another day to make you my wife and put this whole nightmare behind us." That night, Emma lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of the farm and trying to calm her racing mind. Tomorrow she would marry Jeremiah, the man she'd come to love with all her heart. But the threat from Dale and Russo hung over their happiness like a dark cloud. The baby kicked restlessly, as if it too sensed the approaching crisis. Emma placed both hands on her belly and whispered to the child within. "Don't worry, little one," she said softly. "Your papa is going to protect us, all of us." Outside her window, she could see Jeremiah making his rounds of the farm, checking locks and securing anything that could be tampered with. He'd refused to leave her and Timothy alone for even a moment since Rousseau's visit, and she could see the tension in every line of his body. Tomorrow, they would become a family in the eyes of the law as well as in their hearts. But first, they had to survive whatever Dale and his newfound ally were planning. Emma closed her eyes and tried to find sleep, knowing she would need all her strength for the challenges ahead. In just a few hours, she would become Mrs. Jeremiah Caldwell, and with that transformation, she prayed their troubles would finally be over. Dawn broke grey and misty over Millbrook County as Emma prepared for her wedding day. Her hands trembled slightly as she brushed her auburn hair, not from nervousness about marrying Jeremiah, but from the knowledge that today would determine the course of all their lives. The baby had been restless all night, kicking and turning as if it too sensed the momentous day ahead. Mrs. Patterson had arrived before sunrise, carrying a carefully wrapped bundle that she placed reverently on Emma's bed. "This was Sarah's wedding dress," she said quietly. "Jeremiah asked me to bring it, said Sarah would have wanted you to wear it." Emma unwrapped the bundle with careful hands, revealing a simple but elegant dress of cream-colored silk. It was beautifully made, with delicate pearl buttons and lace trim that spoke of loving attention to detail. The waist was designed to accommodate a woman's natural shape, which would work perfectly for Emma's current condition. "It's beautiful," Emma whispered, running her fingers over the soft fabric. "But are you sure it's appropriate? I mean, this was made for Sarah." "Child," Mrs. Patterson said firmly, "Sarah Caldwell was one of the kindest souls God ever created. She'd be honored to have her dress worn by the woman who brought her husband back to life." As Mrs. Patterson helped Emma into the dress, adjusting the fit with a few strategic pins, Timothy burst into the room wearing his best clothes, a white shirt and dark pants that Jeremiah had bought for him in town. "Emmy, you look like a princess," he exclaimed, his eyes wide with wonder. "Thank you, sweetheart," Emma said, kneeling down to his level. "Are you ready to be part of a real family today?" Timothy nodded solemnly. "I've been ready my whole life." The simple profundity of his statement brought tears to Emma's eyes, but Mrs. Patterson quickly intervened with practical efficiency. "No crying before the ceremony," she declared. "We don't have time to fix tear-stained faces." Downstairs, Jeremiah waited in the parlor, dressed in his best black suit with a white shirt and string tie. He'd shaved carefully and combed his dark hair back, but his hands betrayed his nervousness as he adjusted his collar for the third time. When Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, his breath caught. She was radiant in Sarah's dress, her pregnancy making her glow with an inner light that took his breath away. For a moment, he could almost feel Sarah's presence in the room, blessing this union that would heal both their hearts. "You're beautiful," he said simply as Emma reached the bottom of the stairs. "So are you," she replied, and meant it. Jeremiah cleaned up beautifully, his rugged features softened by happiness and anticipation. They traveled to the church in Jeremiah's wagon, with Timothy sitting between them and Mrs. Patterson following in her own buggy. The morning mist was beginning to lift, revealing a day that promised to be clear and bright. "A good omen," Mrs. Patterson declared with satisfaction. Pastor Williams was waiting for them at the small white church that served the rural community. He was a gentleman in his 60s who had known both Jeremiah and Sarah, and he'd agreed readily to perform the ceremony despite the unusual circumstances. "Are we ready?" he asked kindly as they gathered in the simple sanctuary. "We are," Jeremiah replied, taking Emma's hand in his. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Pastor Williams spoke about love that grows from adversity, about families formed not just by blood, but by choice and commitment. When he asked Jeremiah if he would take Emma as his wife, to love and protect her and her children, Jeremiah's voice was strong and clear. "I do with all my heart." When the same question was posed to Emma, she looked into Jeremiah's grey eyes and saw their entire future reflected there. Years of shared work and laughter, children running through the farmyard, growing old together in the house that had become their sanctuary. "I do," she said firmly, her voice carrying across the small church. Timothy, who had been designated as ring-bearer, stepped forward with the simple gold band that Jeremiah had commissioned from the town jeweler. As Jeremiah slipped it onto Emma's finger, she felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. "You may kiss your bride," Pastor Williams announced with a smile. Jeremiah's kiss was gentle but sure, full of promise and commitment. When they broke apart, Timothy cheered loudly, his joy infectious enough to make even Mrs. Patterson smile through her tears. As they signed the marriage certificate, making their union legal and binding, Emma felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Whatever happened at tomorrow's hearing, she was now Mrs. Jeremiah Caldwell, and Timothy was legally Jeremiah's stepson. Dale's claims would hold no water against the sanctity of marriage. The small wedding party returned to the farm for a celebratory lunch that Mrs. Patterson had prepared with military precision. There was roast chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, and a simple cake that she'd somehow managed to bake despite the early hour. To Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, Mrs. Patterson toasted, raising her glass of apple cider. "May your marriage be blessed with long life, great happiness, and many children to fill this house with laughter." "To family," Jeremiah added, his arm around Emma's waist. "Both found and made." They were just finishing their meal when the sound of approaching horses interrupted their celebration. Through the window, they could see Sheriff McKenna riding up the path, followed by two other riders that Emma recognized with a sinking heart, Dale Brennan and Vincent Russo. "Stay inside," Jeremiah instructed Emma and Timothy. "Let me handle this." He stepped onto the porch to meet the approaching men, his posture calm but alert. Emma watched through the window, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "Afternoon." "Tom," Jeremiah said to the sheriff, "what brings you by?" Sheriff McKenna dismounted, his expression grim. "I'm sorry to interrupt your celebration, Jeremiah, but these gentlemen insisted on coming today. They're claiming there's been some kind of fraud." Dale Brennan stumbled off his horse, clearly drunk despite the early hour. His clothes were dirty and wrinkled, and his eyes held the wild look of a man who'd been drinking away his problems for weeks. "Where is she?" Dale demanded, swaying slightly. "Where's my stepdaughter? That man stole her from me." "Emma is no longer your stepdaughter," Jeremiah replied calmly. "She's my wife as of this morning. Here's the marriage certificate to prove it." He handed the document to Sheriff McKenna, who examined it carefully. "This appears to be in order," the sheriff said. "Finally, legal marriage performed by Pastor Williams, properly witnessed and recorded." Vincent Russo had been studying the scene with calculating eyes. Now he stepped forward, his voice smooth but menacing. How convenient that this marriage took place just days before the scheduled hearing, almost as if it were arranged specifically to circumvent Mr. Brennan's legal rights. "My marriage to Emma has nothing to do with Dale's spurious claims," Jeremiah replied. "We married because we love each other and want to build a life together." "Can you prove that?" Russo challenged. "Because it looks to me like a sham marriage, designed to cheat Mr. Brennan out of his rightful property." Emma had heard enough. Despite Jeremiah's instructions to stay inside, she stepped onto the porch, her chin raised defiantly. "I am not property, Mr. Russo," she said clearly. "I never was, and I married Jeremiah because I love him, not because I needed his protection, though I'm grateful for it nonetheless." Dale's eyes focused on her with difficulty. "Emma, there you are. You look different." "I look happy," Emma replied. "Something. I never was in your house. Now see here," Dale said, attempting to summon some authority. "You're still carrying another man's bastard, and that makes you damaged goods. No decent man would want you except out of pity or some kind of legal trickery." The words were barely out of his mouth before Jeremiah moved. In one fluid motion, he stepped down from the porch and grabbed Dale by the front of his dirty shirt. "You will not speak about my wife that way," Jeremiah said, his voice deadly quiet. "Apologize, now." Dale tried to pull away, but Jeremiah's grip was iron. "You can't tell me what to do. She's my wife," Jeremiah interrupted. "And if you ever insult her again, legal consequences will be the least of your worries." Sheriff McKenna stepped between the two men. "That's enough. Dale, you're drunk and making a fool of yourself. Go home and sleep it off." "But what about my rights?" Dale whined. "That man cheated me." "You sold Emma and Timothy at a public auction," Sheriff McKenna said with disgust. "Any rights you had ended the moment you put them on that platform. And now that Emma's married, you have no legal standing whatsoever." Vincent Russo had been watching this exchange with growing frustration. His investment in Dale's claim was clearly not paying off as he'd hoped. "This isn't over," he said to Emma, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "There are other ways to get what I want." "Are you threatening my wife?" Jeremiah asked sharply, having overheard. "I'm simply stating facts," Russo replied smoothly. "Childbirth is dangerous. Accidents happen. Sometimes people disappear." The threat was unmistakable, and Sheriff McKenna's hand moved instinctively to his gun. "Mr. Russo, I strongly suggest you leave this county and don't come back," the sheriff said firmly. "If anything happens to the Caldwells, you'll be the first person I come looking for." Russo smiled coldly, but said nothing more. He climbed back onto his horse and rode away without another word, leaving behind an aura of menace that made everyone uncomfortable. Dale, meanwhile, had slumped against his horse, the fight going out. Of him as the alcohol and disappointment took their toll. "She was supposed to take care of me," he mumbled pathetically. "Her mother promised she'd take care of me. Her mother is dead," Sheriff McKenna said bluntly, "and Emma's built a new life for herself. You need to do the same." As Dale rode away, weaving dangerously in his saddle, Sheriff McKenna turned to Jeremiah and Emma with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry about this," he said, "but I think that's the end of it. With the marriage certificate on file, Dale has no legal claim. And I'll make sure Russo understands he's not welcome in this county." After the sheriff left, the small family stood together on the porch, processing what had just happened. The threat was over, but the ugliness of the confrontation had cast a shadow over their wedding day. "I'm sorry," Emma said quietly. "This is all my fault. I brought this trouble to your door." "Our door," Jeremiah corrected gently. "And you didn't bring trouble. You brought love and life and purpose. Dale and Russo are just the price we had to pay for happiness." Timothy, who had been unusually quiet during the confrontation, suddenly spoke up. "Are the bad men gone now?" "Yes, sweetheart," Emma assured him. "They're gone, and they won't be coming back." "Good," Timothy said with satisfaction. "I didn't. Like them, they made Emmy scared, and nobody should make Emmy scared." That evening, after Mrs. Patterson had returned home and Timothy was tucked safely in bed, Emma and Jeremiah sat together on their front porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. Emma wore a simple dress now instead of Sarah's, a wedding gown, and Jeremiah had changed into his everyday clothes, but the gold ring on Emma's finger caught the moonlight as a permanent reminder of their commitment. "Do you think it's really over?" Emma asked, leaning against Jeremiah's shoulder. "I think Dale's given up," Jeremiah replied. "He's not a fighter when he's sober, and Russo won't risk getting on the wrong side of Sheriff McKenna. We're safe now." Emma sighed with relief, feeling tension leave her body for the first time in weeks. "I can hardly believe it. We're really married. We're really a family." "We were a family long before we said the words in church," Jeremiah said, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "The ceremony just made it official. What do you think Sarah would have thought of all this?" Emma asked quietly. Jeremiah was silent for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I think she would have been happy. Sarah always believed that love multiplies rather than divides, that there's always room for more love in a good heart. I hope I can live up to her memory. You already do every day. But Emma, you don't have to be Sarah, you just have to be yourself. The woman who protected Timothy with nothing but determination, who learned to milk cows when she'd never seen a farm before, who faced down Vincent Russo when he threatened our family." Emma turned in his arms to look at him directly. "Our family. I love the sound of that. So do I. And soon we'll have another member to love and protect." The baby chose that moment to kick vigorously, as if announcing its presence and approval of the day's events. Emma laughed and guided Jeremiah's hand to the spot where their child was moving. "Strong kicks," Jeremiah observed with wonder. "This baby's going to be a force to be reckoned with." "Just like its parents," Emma said with a smile. As they sat together in the peaceful darkness, listening to the night sounds of their farm and feeling their child move between them, Emma reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 weeks ago, she'd been a desperate young woman with no prospects and no hope, standing on an auction platform with her little brother, waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. Now, she was Mrs. Jeremiah Caldwell, mistress of a thriving farm, mother to Timothy and soon to be mother to the child she carried. She had found not just safety but love, not just shelter but home. "What are you thinking about?" Jeremiah asked, noticing her quiet contemplation. "About how different my life is from what I expected," Emma replied. 6 weeks ago I thought my story was ending. Now I feel like it's just beginning." "Our story," Jeremiah corrected gently. "And yes, I think the best chapters are still ahead of us." As if to emphasize his point, Timothy appeared in the doorway in his nightgown, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "I had a bad dream," he said. "Can I sit with you for a while?" "Of course," Emma said, making room for him between her and Jeremiah. Timothy settled in comfortably, apparently feeling secure enough to fall back asleep within minutes. Emma and Jeremiah sat on either side of him, creating a protective circle around the sleeping child. "This is what I wanted," Jeremiah said quietly, looking down at Timothy's peaceful face. "What Sarah and I dreamed of. A family sitting together on the porch, children safe and loved, a home filled with laughter and purpose." "You have it now," Emma said softly. "We all do." As the night deepened around them, the 3 members of the Caldwell family remained on their porch, bound together by love and commitment and the unshakable certainty that they belonged to each other. The threats that had shadowed their happiness were gone, vanquished by the simple but powerful act of choosing love over fear, family over solitude, hope over despair. In the distance, a night bird called from the barn, and somewhere across the fields, another answered. The sound seemed to Emma like a benediction, a blessing on their new beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but tonight, surrounded by love and wrapped in peace, she was exactly where she belonged. The baby stirred gently within her, as if settling in for a long, comfortable sleep, and Emma smiled, knowing that this child would be born not into uncertainty and fear, but into a family that had already proven its strength and commitment. Whatever the future held, they would face it together as they were meant to be, united, unshakable, and unafraid. 6 months later, spring had returned to Millbrook County with a vengeance. The harsh drought that had plagued the region for 3 years was finally broken, and the countryside bloomed with a vitality that seemed to mirror the transformation in the Caldwell household. Green grass stretched across the pastures, wildflowers dotted the hillsides, and the creek that ran through Jeremiah's property babbled with clear, fresh water. Emma stood at the kitchen window, watching Timothy race across the yard with their newest addition, a border collie puppy named Scout that Jeremiah had brought home as a surprise. At 11 years old now, he'd had a birthday in February. Timothy had grown tall and confident, his shoulders broader and his laugh more frequent. The anxious, fearful child who had clung to Emma's skirts at the auction had been replaced by a boy who knew his place in the world and felt secure in his family's love. "Careful with that puppy," Emma called through the open window. "Don't wear him out." Timothy waved acknowledgement but continued his game, teaching Scout to fetch a stick while maintaining a running commentary on proper dog training techniques he'd learned from Mr. Henderson, their nearest neighbor. Emma smiled and turned her attention back to the kitchen, where she was preparing lunch for the men who were helping Jeremiah expand the barn. Their farm had prospered over the winter, and with a new baby in the house, they needed more space for both animals and equipment. The baby in question was currently sleeping peacefully in a cradle that Jeremiah had crafted with his own hands, positioned near the kitchen table where Emma could keep watch while she worked. Rose Sarah Caldwell had arrived 3 months ago during a gentle snowfall in January, making her entrance into the world with the same quiet determination that seemed to characterize the entire family. She was a beautiful child, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's grey eyes, though everyone insisted she had Timothy's stubborn chin. From the beginning, she'd been an easy baby, sleeping well, eating heartily, and rarely fussing except when she genuinely needed something. "She knows she's loved," Mrs. Patterson had declared during one of her visits. "Babies can sense that kind of security, makes them peaceful." Mrs. Patterson still came 3 times a week, but her role had evolved from helper to beloved family friend. She doted on Rose with the fierce affection of a grandmother, and her relationship with Timothy had developed into a special bond built on shared stories and baking lessons. The sound of hammering from the barn reminded Emma that she needed to get lunch ready for the work crew. Jeremiah had insisted on hiring help for the expansion rather than doing all the work himself, claiming he didn't want to be away from his family for the long hours that such a project would require. "Besides," he'd said with a grin, "I can afford to hire help now. Business has been good." It was true. The farm was thriving in ways that went beyond mere financial success. Word had spread throughout the county about Jeremiah's fair dealings and quality livestock, and he'd developed a reputation that brought customers from as far away as the state capital. More importantly, the Caldwell farm had become known as a place where people in need could find help, a family that remembered what it was like to struggle and never turned away someone who genuinely needed assistance. Just last month, they'd taken in a young couple whose crops had failed, giving them work and a place to stay until they could get back on their feet. The month before that, Emma had organized the women of the county to provide food and clothing for a family whose house had burned down. "We know what it's like to need help," Emma had told the grateful recipients. "Someday, when you're able, you'll help someone else. That's how kindness works. It keeps moving forward." As Emma finished preparing sandwiches and fresh lemonade, she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Looking out the window, she saw Pastor Williams climbing down from his buggy, followed by a woman and 2 children she didn't recognize. Pastor Williams had become a regular visitor to the farm, drawn by the warmth of the Caldwell household and their generous support of his small church. He often brought people who needed help, knowing that Jeremiah and Emma would find a way to assist however they could. Emma wiped her hands on her apron and went to greet the visitors, automatically, settling into the role of hostess that had become second nature to her. "Pastor Williams," she said warmly, "what a lovely surprise. Please come in out of the sun." "Mrs. Caldwell," the pastor replied with a smile, "I hope you don't mind the unexpected visit. I'd like you to meet Mrs. Sarah Beth Cooper and her children. Michael and Jenny. The woman was probably in her 30s, with brown hair and tired eyes that spoke of recent hardship. Her children, a boy of about 8 and a girl perhaps 6 years old, stayed close to their mother's sides, eyeing their surroundings with the wariness that Emma remembered all too well. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Emma said gently, sensing their nervousness. "Please sit down. I was just making lunch for the men working on our barn. There's plenty for everyone." Mrs. Cooper's eyes filled with tears at the simple offer of food. "You're very kind, but we don't want to impose." "Nonsense," Emma said firmly but gently. "There's no such thing as imposing when it comes to a meal." "Timothy," her son appeared in the doorway, Scout tumbling at his heels. "Yes, Emma. Would you go tell your father that Pastor Williams is here with some guests, and ask him if the men can take their lunch break now?" Timothy nodded and raced off, his natural exuberance a stark contrast to the quiet children who watched him with something like envy. As Emma bustled around the kitchen, setting out additional plates and glasses, Pastor Williams explained the Cooper's situation in quiet tones. Mrs. Cooper's husband had died in a mining accident 3 months ago, leaving her with no income and mounting debts. She'd lost their home and been forced to seek shelter wherever she could find it. "I thought perhaps you might know of work in the area," Pastor Williams concluded. "Mrs. Cooper is an excellent seamstress, and the children are well behaved and eager to help however they can." Emma looked at the small family, seeing herself and Timothy in their circumstances. The fear, the uncertainty, the desperate hope that someone might offer a chance for something better, it all felt achingly familiar. "As it happens," Emma said thoughtfully, "I've been needing help with the sewing, with the baby and Timothy and all the household tasks. I'm getting behind on mending and such. Would you be interested in helping with that, Mrs. Cooper? I could provide room and board, plus a small wage." Mrs. Cooper's face lit up with hope and relief. "Oh, yes, I would be so grateful for the work. And I bet Michael and Jenny would love to help Timothy with the farm chores," Emma continued, warming to the idea. "Timothy's been wanting someone to help him train Scout properly." When Jeremiah arrived with the work crew for lunch, he took in the situation with one glance and immediately fell into step with Emma's plan. "Mrs. Cooper," he said with genuine warmth, "welcome to our farm. Emma's told me about your sewing skills. We'd be honored to have you and your children stay with us for as long as you need." The relief on Mrs. Cooper's face was so profound that Emma felt tears prick her own eyes. She remembered that feeling, the moment when despair transformed into hope, when strangers became family, when the impossible suddenly became possible. That evening, after the Coopers had been settled into the spare room and the children had been fed and bathed, Emma and Jeremiah sat on their front porch with baby Rose sleeping in Emma's arms. Timothy was in the yard with Michael and Jenny, teaching them the finer points of firefly catching while Scout barked encouragement. "Do you think we're crazy?" Emma asked quietly. "Taking in another family when we've got so much going on ourselves?" Jeremiah considered the question seriously, as he did most things. "I think we're doing what feels right, and I think it's what Rose should see as she grows up, that home is a place where there's always room for one more, where kindness isn't limited by what we can afford." "Timothy loves having other children around," Emma observed, watching their son demonstrate proper firefly etiquette to his new friends. "He does. And Mrs. Cooper seems like good people. Her children are polite and grateful, not spoiled or demanding." Emma adjusted baby Rose in her arms, marveling at how perfectly the infant fit against her chest. Rose had been such an easy pregnancy and delivery, so different from the stress and fear that had characterized her early months of carrying the child. "Sometimes I can't believe this is really our life," Emma said softly. "A year ago I was terrified and alone, with no idea what would happen to Timothy and the baby. Now look at us." "Look at you," Jeremiah corrected gently. You've become the heart of this community, Emma. People come to you for advice, for help, for comfort. You've created something beautiful here. We've created it, Emma insisted. None of this would have been possible without you taking that first leap of faith at the auction. Maybe. But you're the one who made it into a home. You're the one who saw potential in a bitter widower and a frightened little boy and a farm that was just going through the motions. Rose stirred in Emma's arms, making the soft cooing sounds that never failed to melt her parents' hearts. The baby's eyes opened, focusing on Emma's face with the intense attention that babies brought to studying their mothers. "Hello, little love," Emma whispered. "Did you have a good nap?" As if in response, Rose smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her tiny face. It was still early for social smiles, but Rose had been surprising everyone with her precocious development. "She knows she's safe," Jeremiah said, reaching over to stroke his daughter's soft cheek. "She's never known anything but love and security." "That's what I wanted most," Emma replied. "For all our children to grow up knowing they're wanted and loved and secure." "All our children?" Jeremiah asked with a raised eyebrow. "Are you planning something I should know about?" Emma laughed softly. "Not immediately, but someday maybe. And I include Timothy in that, of course. And now Michael and Jenny at least, for as long as they're with us." "I love your generous heart," Jeremiah said, leaning over to kiss her temple. "One of the many things I love about you." As the evening deepened and the fireflies began their nightly dance, the children's laughter carried across the yard like music. Mrs. Cooper appeared on the porch, having finished settling her younger children for bed. "I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Jenny hasn't laughed like that since her father died. And Michael, he's been trying so hard to be the man of the family. It's good to see him being a child again." "They're welcome here for as long as you need," Emma assured her. "And once you've had time to get back on your feet, we'll help you find whatever comes next. If there's anything I can do to help around here, cooking, cleaning, anything, please just ask." "Right now, just rest," Emma said kindly. "Tomorrow we'll figure out a routine that works for everyone." After Mrs. Cooper went back inside, Emma and Jeremiah remained on the porch, reluctant to end the peaceful evening. Rose had fallen back asleep. Her tiny fist curled around Emma's finger with surprising strength. "I've been thinking about expanding the house," Jeremiah said eventually. "Adding another bedroom or two, maybe a bigger kitchen. We seem to be accumulating people." Emma smiled at his gentle teasing. "Are you complaining?" "Never. I love how full this house feels, how alive. It's what I always dreamed of, but never dared hope for after Sarah died. She would approve, wouldn't she, of all this?" "I think she would love it," Jeremiah said with conviction. "Sarah always said that love was meant to be shared, not hoarded. She would especially love watching you with the children, all of them." As if summoned by their conversation, Timothy appeared on the porch, grass stains on his clothes and dirt under his fingernails, but glowing with happiness. Michael caught 3 fireflies all by himself, he announced proudly, "and Jenny knows how to whistle really loud. She taught me a new way to do it." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Emma said. "Are you ready to come in and get cleaned up for bed? Can Michael and Jenny have a snack first? They said they didn't eat much dinner because they were nervous, but now they're really hungry." Emma and Jeremiah exchanged a look of understanding. They both remembered the way anxiety could suppress appetite, and how security could bring hunger flooding back. "Of course," Emma said. "There's leftover cornbread and milk. You can all have a little snack before bed." As Timothy raced back to share the good news with his new friends, Emma reflected on how naturally he'd adapted to his role as big brother and leader. The responsibility had brought out the best in him, making him more confident and caring. "He's going to be a good man," Jeremiah observed, following her thoughts. "Kind and generous, like his sister." "Like his father," Emma added, squeezing Jeremiah's hand. Later that night, after all the children had been fed, cleaned, and tucked into bed, Emma and Jeremiah made their final rounds of the farm. It was a ritual they'd developed over the months, of their marriage, checking on the animals, securing gates and doors, making sure everything was ready for another night of peaceful sleep. The barn expansion was progressing well, with the new sections framed and ready for roofing. Soon they'd have space for twice as many animals, plus proper storage for hay and equipment. It was a sign of their prosperity, but also of their commitment to the future. "I had a letter from Sheriff McKenna today," Jeremiah mentioned as they checked the chicken coop. "Dale Brennan left the county last month. Apparently he lost all the money from your sale in a poker game and couldn't pay his debts." Emma felt a moment of sadness for the man who had caused them so much trouble. "I hope he finds his way to a better life somewhere." "You're more forgiving than I am," Jeremiah admitted, "but I suppose everyone deserves a chance at redemption." "Everyone deserves love," Emma corrected gently, "even people who don't know how to accept it." As they walked back toward the house, Emma marveled at how different the world looked through the lens of security and love. The same moon that had once seemed cold and distant now felt like a benevolent presence watching over their family. Isha'el. Same fields that had once seemed endless and hostile now felt like a protective embrace around their home. "What are you thinking about?" Jeremiah asked, noticing her contemplative mood. "About how grateful I am for all of this, but especially for you, for the man who saw something worth saving in a desperate girl at an auction." "I saw the woman I was meant to love," Jeremiah said simply. "I just didn't know it yet." As they reached the porch, Emma paused to look back at their farm. The sturdy house with warm light glowing in the windows, the barn that would soon be even more impressive, the pastures where their animals grazed contentedly, the garden that provided food for their table and flowers for their joy. "This is what home looks like," she said softly. "This is what love looks like," Jeremiah corrected, taking her hand. "All of it, the work and the worry, the children and the challenges, the everyday miracles and the extraordinary ones. It all adds up to love." Inside the house, they checked on the children one last time. Timothy was fast asleep in his room, Scout curled up on the rug beside his bed. In the guest room, Mrs. Cooper sat in a chair between her children's beds, watching over them with the vigilant love of a mother who had feared for their future and found unexpected hope. Baby Rose slept peacefully in her cradle, one tiny hand pressed against her cheek, dreaming whatever sweet dreams filled the minds of infants who knew only love and warmth and security. As Emma and Jeremiah finally retired to their own room, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought them all together. From the desperation of that terrible day at the courthouse auction to this moment of perfect contentment, it seemed like a lifetime had passed. Yet it had been less than a year since Jeremiah had spoken those life-changing words. "I'll take her." Those words had saved more than just Emma and Timothy. They had saved Jeremiah himself, pulling him out of the isolation and grief that had consumed him since Sarah's death. They had created not just a family, but a community, a place where love multiplied rather than divided, where there was always room for one more heart around the table. As Emma drifted off to sleep beside her husband, with their daughter breathing softly nearby and their extended family safe under the same roof, she offered a prayer of gratitude for the man who had seen past her circumstances to her potential, who had chosen love over loneliness, hope over despair. Outside, the night settled over Millbrook County with gentle benediction, and in the Caldwell farmhouse, 6 hearts beat in the quiet rhythm of a family at peace, dreaming of all the tomorrows still to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.